is March 12th, 2025, and nothing tells you that Russia is on the brink of retaking the entire Kursk region and putting an end to Kiev's incursion there, quite like when President Putin himself is there in person getting briefed by his top generals. We're going to get into all of the latest on what was said and the latest movements that have been reported there, as we also look at the fact that while the US and Ukraine, they've been really attempting to command headlines over the last 24 hours with this ceasefire proposal, right now putting the pressure on Russia to say yes or to say no. Well, Russia's not concerned about that at all, right? Their response is to say that they haven't even received the proposal, so they can't comment on it, while at the same time making it clear that their focus is on the major gains that they are making on the battlefield. All of this as Zelensky, of course, can't stop talking and is basically admitting that he has learned absolutely nothing in the last 3 years. Oh, and that he's just going along with this plan because he thinks that Russia won't. We have a lot to get into today, so let's get started. And let's start off with the update that Russian President Putin has visited the Kursk region today, where he met with his top generals, including his chief of staff, who told him that 86% of the Kursk region territory that was initially held by Kiev's forces back in August has been liberated, and that the Ukrainian army has suffered 67,000 casualties, lost 7,000 vehicles on the Kursk front, and that Ukrainian strategic plans for the Kursk region have failed. So what were those strategic goals exactly? Well, if you go back to August, there were reports that Kiev's forces were trying to gain as much territory as possible in Russia's Kursk border region in order to have something to bargain with for future peace talks. There were also reports too that they were trying to gain control of the Kursk power plant. Clearly, that didn't work out too well, but it's been interesting to watch as you've seen these Russian advances over the last 48 hours. You had Russian forces gain an additional 100 square kilometers in just 24 hours, including 12 villages, and then their focus became on Sudza, which is the only town that Kiev seized during its incursion. And now you have reports that Ukrainian forces have fully withdrawn from that town, which was described as their key supply hub in the region. And it's important to note that this is not just Russian media reporting this. Oh no, it's also Ukrainian sources. With the online deep state map, which is updated by Ukrainian users with publicly available data, well, it appeared to show Ukrainian forces no longer in control of Sudza. And just let that sink in for a minute, because I do not think that Russian officials would be making this announcement, right? Coming out and saying that they have Ukrainian forces completely surrounded and that they have taken back 86% of the territory that was part of this initial incursion if they didn't have the data to back it up. And from everything that we're seeing, they are absolutely spot on there. This was supposed to be the bargaining chip, right? This was supposed to be what Kiev used when they went to the table. And now they once again are making themselves look completely ridiculous in front of the Trump administration when they don't even have this incursion into Russian territory to be able to brag about and to act as though they have something to present to Russia. Now, at the time of this recording, the Trump administration, right, whether it's Trump himself or any of his top officials, have not responded to the situation in Kursk, at least from what I've seen. But I do want to focus in on a statement that was made by Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Tuesday, because as I was saying before, the focus by the US right now has been to say, hey, look over here, right? Look at these talks that we held with Kiev's officials as if we should be proud of them. These talks that were held in Saudi Arabia for apparently over 9 hours on Tuesday, and that they came out of that with the US saying that they would resume the supply of military aid and intelligence sharing with Kiev in exchange for Kiev agreeing to a 30-day ceasefire with Russia. A ceasefire that, as we're talking about here, why would Russia agree to a 30-day ceasefire, right? They are making significant momentum in the Kursk region. Why would that be something that they would agree to right now? Well, it seems as though that part didn't really occur to Rubio.
As far as the Russian reaction to it, that's really the question here. And that is, this is a few hours old. We're going to bring it to them directly. We're going to say that Ukraine is prepared to stop all battlefield activity and begin the immediate process of negotiating an enduring end to the war. And we'll see what their response is. If their response is yes, then we know we've made real progress and there's a real chance of peace. If their response is no, it would be highly unfortunate and it would make their intentions clear.
And this is yet another reminder that you have the Trump administration making the same mistake that the Biden administration made, which was to act as though Kiev, NATO, the US, that they are the ones winning this war. Therefore, they are the ones who are getting to dictate the terms to Moscow, right? Getting to come to them and say, we offer you a 30-day ceasefire, and expecting Russia to just jump for joy and say, yeah, sure, we'll hop on board with this. Now, I do read the comment section on my videos. I know that in yesterday's video, I got a few comments from people who were saying things to the extent of, this is the way that Trump negotiates, right? Do you just expect him to kind of roll over and to do nothing and to just give Kiev on a silver platter to Russia? I actually don't expect that. However, one thing that I will draw the attention to once again is the fact that just a couple of weeks ago, you had Trump sitting there publicly with Zelensky and telling everyone Ukraine is losing this war. Russia is winning this war. Russia holds all of the cards right now. The message that Trump was sending was, hey, let's agree to some sort of a deal before this gets even worse for Ukraine, before we have less territory to bargain with. 2 weeks later, guess what? They now have less territory for Ukraine to bargain with. Trump was right there. However, now you have his administration on the exact opposite end, acting as though they have plenty to bargain with, right? Rubio sitting there being like, oh, we need Russia to sign on to this deal, or that's really going to show us what their intentions are. Like, really? Russia's been very clear about what their intentions are. I don't think that that's exactly a secret here. Now, of course, the Kremlin was asked for a response to these reports that the US and Ukraine had come up with some sort of a ceasefire deal. And we did hear from spokesman Dmitry Peskov, as he said on Wednesday that Russia can't comment on the reported ceasefire proposal because the US has not presented them with any information on it. He also noted that Russia is, quote, carefully studying the statements that were made as a result of the talks. Now, that's a fair statement given the fact that the US hasn't actually given this proposal directly to Russia just yet. But it is notable the wording there coming from Peskov, because when he's saying we are carefully watching, right, carefully paying attention to these statements that were made, that tells me that Russia is keeping an eye on the Trump administration and they're watching them resume the delivery of military aid for and intelligence sharing with Kiev. Because it was one thing if it was just approved under the Biden administration and, oh, okay, that's something that Trump just hasn't gotten to yet. But it's another thing when Trump chooses to halt it and then a week later chooses to allow it to resume, because now Trump is the one who is responsible. He's the one who was responsible for allowing this military aid to go to Ukraine to be used directly against Russia. He is the one who is responsible for providing the intelligence information and the satellite data for Kiev to carry out attacks on its end to kill Russians. That is the statement that is being made to Russia. At the same time, Russia is also keeping an eye on Zelensky, although they've made it clear that they do not view him as the legitimate president or leader of Ukraine now that his term has been up for almost a year now. But they're also watching how much the US is allowing Zelensky to get away with under Trump's watch. And that apparently includes Zelensky's latest comments, in which he openly said and made it very clear that the only reason that he would sign on board for this 30-day ceasefire plan is because he believes that the Russians won't. And he's very aware he needs to make it clear to the US that he is all for peace and basically whatever Trump wants.
I myself mentioned it several times. Not a single one of us believes Russians. We've been through that. And we are not going to play with the narrative spread by Russia worldwide on that. I reiterate that we want to end this war, and I want the US president to see it. I want the Americans to see and to feel it.
In other words, Zelensky is doing what he has to do in order to get back on Trump's good side. But he didn't stop there. He also decided that he was going to talk about the situation related to the territory, and he made it clear that he has learned absolutely nothing.
As the president of my country, I can tell you that me, myself, and the people of my country will never break constitution. They will always be defending our land, our lives. It's not easy to fight against an enemy like that, but this is our fight for independence. So we are not going to recognize any territories occupied by the Russian territory.
So yes, after 3 years, which have included one defeat after another for Ukrainian forces, Zelensky is still sitting there acting as though he expects to get all of the Donbas region and all of Crimea back under his control, that he expects to force that territory back under his control, despite the fact that that is not what the people who live there actually want. That is not their democratic and free will, and they have made that very clear. And yes, that's even as Rubio said that American and Ukrainian delegations discussed the issue of territorial concessions during their over 9-hour meeting in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday. And yes, Zelensky makes a statement like that even as Russian forces continue to advance in the Kursk region and make it very clear that Kiev's little incursion stunt is on its way out the door. And you know it's getting bad when the Western media acknowledge the reality of the situation, as the Wall Street Journal led with the headline, "Ukraine turns tables with ceasefire proposal, but Putin has little incentive to sign." And they're exactly right. Why would Russia agree to a 30-day ceasefire that would halt the momentum that they're currently making and then also give NATO another 30 days to attempt to rearm Kiev's forces? Meanwhile, Bloomberg ran with the headline, "Putin likely to drag out Ukraine truce talks to seek terms," in which they say that the Russian president will probably agree to eventual truce terms with Ukraine, but wants his own conditions met beforehand, likely dragging out the negotiation. And yeah, Putin should seek his own terms. I mean, Russia is winning this war. Why would they come to the table and just accept anything that does not meet their demands? And sure, as that article pointed out, there could be an eventual agreement. I do think that there is likely to be one further down the road, but I also think they have a point. Russia is likely to drag out these negotiations, and I don't exactly see that as a bad thing, because I don't expect Russia to just come and say, yeah, no, we're not going to talk to you, right? You offered us a 30-day ceasefire, and we're just cutting off talks altogether. No, that's not what I mean when I say that they won't accept a ceasefire. What I mean is that I think they're going to keep, sure, we'll keep talking, right? We'll keep these talks going, but Russia is also going to maintain their demands the entire way through, as they should. Now, even if Russia does not immediately laugh the American officials out of the room when they come with the ceasefire proposal, I can still see the route that the media is going to attempt to take here. And I say that because you already kind of see some headlines putting it out there that, oh, this is a way for Trump to call Putin's bluff, right? They claim that, Russia may say that they want to pursue an end to this war, but if they do not agree to a 30-day ceasefire, then they clearly aren't serious. Now, clearly they aren't paying attention to the reality on the battlefield whatsoever, especially right now with Russia's latest advances. But we also have to take into account here that if the entire goal, right, if the goal was for the US to get Kiev in a position to where it would say, yeah, sure, we'll do a 30-day ceasefire, just so that they could get Moscow to say no, to say that they will not agree to a ceasefire right now. And so that as soon as Russia says no, then the US can just ramp up their support for Ukraine. Well, then the US was never really pursuing peace to begin with. And I know I'm reminded in my comments often that a lot of people think that this is just, a version of Trump negotiating, right? That this is how he does things. It's the art of the deal. And he may think that that's the case. But what the Trump administration needs to pay attention to right now is what's happening in the Kursk region, right? They need to pay attention to the timing of it. The fact that Russia was very methodical in its approach. It did not throw all of its energy and all of its resources at combating Kiev's incursion back in August. They could have done that. They chose not to. They allowed Kiev to send some of their best forces into a meat grinder to essentially sacrifice some of their best in order to keep this incursion in the Kursk region ongoing, in order to keep claiming that they had some sort of bargaining chip. And while yes, Russian forces did make gains in the Kursk region, right? They've continued to tackle Kiev's forces over the course of months. Pay attention to the timing here. Because when we're seeing these major advances on Russia's end, when we're seeing them get so close to the point and basically be on the brink of wiping out Kiev's incursion altogether, that's happening at the time that Kiev wants to be able to use that bargaining chip the most. And guess what? They don't have it any longer. So as these talks continue to progress, as we continue to see negotiations and the Trump administration continues to decide what kind of proposals they want to present to Russia, well, they need to start paying attention to what Russia is doing on the battlefield and how they are working systematically to put NATO in a place where they should not want to keep doing this much longer. And whether they decide to, whether they want to keep getting humiliated again and again, well, that's entirely up to them. But exactly as Russia has said, no ceasefire, no frozen conflict, they've also said they're going to keep moving forward on the battlefield for as long as this conflict is ongoing. And that's something everyone should be talking about. If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanction. You can also find Sanction over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/RachelBlevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.